What if the one person who should support you becomes your biggest obstacle? Imagine having a dream so powerful, so deeply rooted in your soul, that it feels like breathing. Now, imagine the one person who's supposed to protect you. Asterisk, asterisk, the person who should believe in you the most. Asterisk, asterisk, trying to destroy it. That's exactly what happened to Malcolm Bennett. A boy with a passion for dance. A father who saw it as a weakness. A world that told him he didn't belong. But when everything was stacked against him, Malcolm made a choice to fight back. Stay until the end of this video to witness his incredible journey of resilience, betrayal, and triumph. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you love stories of courage and perseverance, subscribe to Inspiring Stories Told so you never miss an update. Let's make this journey together. The Bennett estate was a fortress of silence and order. Every room was pristine, every schedule meticulously followed. There was no place for clutter, of thoughts, of emotions, or of unnecessary passions. At least, that was how Daniel Bennett preferred it. Standing at the pinnacle of Boston's elite, Daniel had built an empire on discipline and control. He moved through the world like a general, commanding respect and demanding excellence. Weakness was not tolerated. Emotion was an indulgence. And failure? Unforgivable. In his eyes, his son, Malcolm Bennett, was being groomed for greatness. A 12-year-old prodigy, Malcolm had already memorized economic theories and could recite legal arguments with unnerving precision. A Bennett was supposed to be unstoppable, untouchable, a legacy, not a liability. But Malcolm was suffocating. His father's expectations weighed on him like an iron cage, each rule tightening around his ribs, making it harder to breathe. Every morning began at dawn, a strict regimen of reading, studying, and carefully curated social interactions. Tutors rotated in and out of their estate like chess pieces, each one assigned to perfect Malcolm's skills in finance, law, and politics. There was no room for joy. There was no room for dance. Yet, that was where Malcolm's heart truly was. Malcolm had discovered dance by accident. Months ago, he had stumbled upon a video of a ballet performance while scrolling through his father's laptop, an elegant, electrifying display of movement and emotion. The way the dancers leaped, spun, and glided across the stage, it was unlike anything he had ever seen. He had rewatched that video 100 times. At night, when the house was dark and the weight of his father's expectations momentarily lifted, Malcolm would push his furniture aside and move. His body, so used to being still, so used to being restrained, came alive in those stolen moments. At first, he was awkward. His feet fumbled, his limbs unsure. But every night he practiced. Every night he grew stronger, smoother, more confident. And yet, fear gripped him just as tightly as his passion did. He knew what his father would say. Dancing is foolish. Dancing is weak. Dancing is not for a Bennett, especially not for a black boy trying to survive in a white man's world. So Malcolm hid it. Until the night he was caught. The air was thick with humidity, the kind that clung to the skin and made the world feel too small. Malcolm had snuck out to the garden, his feet brushing against the cool grass as he moved, the moonlight casting long shadows across the estate grounds. He had been so lost in the music, spinning, leaping, feeling free for the first time all day, that he hadn't heard the quiet footsteps behind him. "You move well." The voice sent a cold bolt of fear through Malcolm's spine. He whipped around, heart hammering. Standing a few feet away was Celeste Rivera, their housekeeper. A Latina woman in her early 40s, Celeste had a quiet presence in the house. She spoke only when necessary, kept her head down, and never crossed Daniel Bennett's invisible lines of authority. To Malcolm, she had always just been a shadow in the background, until now. Malcolm's chest heaved, panic rising in his throat. "Please, don't tell my father," he blurted. Celeste didn't respond right away. She simply studied him, her sharp brown eyes sweeping over his stance, his form, the way he held himself after the final beat of his dance. Then she took a slow step forward. "Where did you learn to do that?" Malcolm hesitated. His fingers twitched at his sides. Nowhere. I just watched videos. Practiced in my room. Celeste let out a breath, almost a whisper of disbelief. Then she lifted her arms, turned on her heel, and executed a flawless spin, a move so sharp, so effortless, that it felt like watching the wind dance. Malcolm stared, wide-eyed. You're a dancer. Celeste's expression hardened. I was. A long time ago. The weight behind her words was undeniable. Malcolm didn't dare ask more. Instead, he swallowed, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Are you going to tell my father? His voice was barely above a whisper. Celeste was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, she shook her head. No, but I will tell you this. If you love it, don't waste it. Malcolm's breath caught in his throat. And then, she said something he never expected. If you want to learn, I can teach you. For the first time in years, Malcolm felt hope. Celeste explained in hushed tones how she had once trained in ballet, how she had competed, how she had felt the sting of rejection and dismissal as a woman of color in an elite art form. She had lived the struggle Malcolm was terrified of. And yet, she had fought for her place anyway. You don't have to go through this alone, she had whispered that night. But you have to be willing to fight for it. Malcolm nodded, his throat tight. He would. He had to. And so, their secret training began. Every night, when the house was still, Malcolm would sneak out to the garden, where Celeste would be waiting. She was a strict teacher, far harsher than he had expected. His muscles burned from exercises he had never done before. His feet ached from repetition, from mistakes corrected and then corrected again. Again, she would say, over and over. Again, until it's perfect. Malcolm loved every second of it. But the fear never left. What if his father found out? The consequences would be disastrous. And yet, as he spun under the moonlight, sweat rolling down his skin, for the first time, he felt truly free. But freedom never lasted long in the Bennett household, because secrets had a way of unraveling. Malcolm was careful. He covered his tracks. He made sure his father never noticed the soreness in his legs, the slight limp from pushing himself too hard the night before. But Daniel Bennett was not a man easily deceived. He had built his empire by knowing every single move his opponents made before they even made it. And Malcolm, his own son, was about to learn just how dangerous it was to play a game he wasn't supposed to win, because the walls of control were closing in. And Malcolm's secret? It wouldn't stay hidden for long. Malcolm's world is on the edge of collapse, his secret, his passion, his only escape hanging by a thread. How do you feel right now? Are you holding your breath, fearing what comes next? If you want me to continue this journey, press 1. If you want us to stop, press 0. The night air was thick with tension, the moon casting long shadows over the pristine garden. Malcolm's muscles ached, his breath coming in sharp, exhilarated bursts. Celeste watched him with an approving nod, arms folded as she prepared to correct his stance once more. Again, but this time, keep your shoulders loose. Dance isn't just about movement, it's about feeling. Malcolm exhaled, nodded, and prepared to repeat the sequence when, crack, the sharp sound of a branch snapping sent ice through Malcolm's veins. His body went rigid, heart hammering against his ribs. Someone was watching. Celeste must have sensed it too. Her expression hardened, her posture shifting from mentor to protector in an instant. Slowly, both of them turned toward the source of the sound. And there he was, Daniel Bennett, standing on the stone pathway, towering in his expensive black suit, eyes burning with cold fury. Malcolm felt his stomach drop. For a moment, there was only silence. A suffocating, terrifying silence that felt heavier than any weight Malcolm had ever carried. Then Daniel's voice, razor-sharp and venomous. What the hell is this? Malcolm's mouth went dry. He wanted to speak, to explain, but his voice wouldn't come. Celeste, however, stood her ground. Senor Bennett, he was practicing. Her voice was calm, but Malcolm could hear the steel beneath it. She wasn't afraid. Daniel turned his gaze on her, slow and deliberate. Practicing what exactly? Embarrassing himself? Embarrassing me. He took a slow step forward, his presence swallowing the space between them. Malcolm's hands curled into fists. Dad, but Daniel didn't even look at him. His voice was ice. You are not some street performer, Malcolm. You are a Bennett. This foolishness ends now. Then he turned back to Celeste. And you? He took another step, looming over her. You're done. Pack your things. You're fired. The words sliced through the air like a blade. Malcolm felt everything shatter inside him. No. He lunged forward, desperate, pleading. Dad, you can't do this. She was helping me. Daniel's gaze snapped to him, his cold, piercing eyes locking onto his son with terrifying intensity. Helping you? Helping you ruin your future? Helping you make a fool of yourself? He scoffed, shaking his head. You think they'll ever respect you? A black boy dancing? No, Malcolm. They'll laugh at you. The way they've laughed at every fool who thought he could be more than what the world allows. Malcolm felt his chest cave in. He had always known his father was tough. Ruthless, even. But this was different. This was contempt. Celeste inhaled sharply, stepping between them. With all due respect, Senior Bennett, your son has real talent. I've seen it. He deserves a chance. Daniel's expression darkened. He deserves to understand reality. And in reality, you are nothing here. You're lucky I even let you speak. Celeste's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She knew better than to fight against power like his. She turned to Malcolm, her dark brown eyes filled with sorrow and something else, pride. She put a hand on his shoulder. Keep dancing, Mijo, no matter what he says. And with that, she walked away. Just like that, Malcolm lost the one person who had ever believed in him. His father turned away, walking back toward the house. Inside. Now, Malcolm hesitated for only a second before clenching his jaw and following. But as he stepped inside, he knew something had changed. Something inside him had broken, and it could never be repaired. The next evening, Malcolm stood stiffly in the grand ballroom of the Cambridge Club, a place where Boston's elite gathered to toast to their own superiority. The room was adorned with gold chandeliers, the air thick with the scent of aged wine and privilege. Malcolm's black tuxedo itched against his skin, the fabric too tight, suffocating him. His father moved through the crowd like a king among men, shaking hands with senators, investors, and the headmasters of Boston's finest private academies. Malcolm wanted nothing more than to disappear. But then he heard them. The whispers. The murmurs. He wasn't supposed to hear them. But he did. There's the boy. The one who'll take over Bennett Holdings one day. They're grooming him well. He'll need it. A black CEO? That'll be a first. A dry chuckle. If he even makes it that far. I mean, who knows? Maybe he'll be one of those artsy types. Go rogue, embarrass the family. God forbid. A Bennett? Dancing? Now that would be a real joke. Maybe as a street act. Laughter. Mocking. Cold. Cruel. Malcolm's throat tightened, his fingers trembling at his sides. Then something far worse happened. His father, his own father, laughed too. Not a forced, polite chuckle. Not an uncomfortable smirk. A real laugh. Malcolm's stomach twisted. His father was laughing at him. He turned, eyes burning, but Daniel was already clinking his glass, raising it in a toast with Liam Kingsley's father. And that's when Malcolm saw him. Liam Kingsley, the son of Daniel's business partner, stood at the center of the ballroom, poised, dressed in white, his posture effortless. He was about to perform. The orchestra struck a chord, and Liam began to dance. Malcolm couldn't look away. The way he moved, graceful, powerful, controlled, it was mesmerizing. It was everything Malcolm wanted. Everything Malcolm was denied. Then, as if fate had decided to punish him further, Liam's gaze locked onto Malcolm's. And he smirked. Malcolm's fists clenched. Then the whispers began again. Kingsley is a real performer. Not like some charity case trying to fit in. That's how it's done. Precision. Control. Not whatever it is those kids do in the streets. Malcolm felt sick. He had never felt so small. So worthless. He turned to his father, expecting something, a look of encouragement, of acknowledgement. Anything. But Daniel wasn't even looking at him. He was watching Liam. Malcolm had seen that look before. It was the look of approval, the look of pride. But it wasn't for him. Never for him. His father would rather praise the white son of another businessman than acknowledge his own child's dream. Malcolm wanted to scream. Instead, he lowered his head, his body numb. He felt like he was vanishing, and no one in the room would even notice. Malcolm's world is crumbling, his passion crushed, his father's betrayal cutting deeper than any wound. How do you feel right now? Can you imagine fighting for something you love, only to be laughed at by those who should support you? If you were Malcolm, would you stay silent or fight back? What would you do if the very people meant to uplift you were the ones holding you down? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. If you're invested in this story, press 1 to continue. If not, press 0. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. The night after the gala, Malcolm lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of his public humiliation over and over again. His father's laughter at his expense, the whispers, the way Liam Kingsley smirked at him like he was nothing. He wanted to scream. He wanted to disappear. But most of all, he wanted to dance. And so, despite the weight in his chest, despite the aching in his throat, he pushed back the blankets, tiptoed across the marble floor, and moved. He turned, leaped, let the pain melt into the rhythm of his body. This was the only place where he felt like himself. But Malcolm was not careful enough this time. Somewhere outside his room, the hallway light flickered on. Then, his bedroom door swung open. His father's shadow stretched across the floor like a storm cloud. Malcolm froze mid-step, his chest seized with panic. Daniel Bennett stood in the doorway, phone in hand, his face an icy mask of rage. Explain this. Malcolm didn't understand at first. But then Daniel turned the screen toward him. An email. The subject line made Malcolm's stomach drop. Incident report. Malcolm Bennett skipping business seminar. The headmaster from his elite academy had reported him. And attached to the email was a photo. Malcolm, standing in the rehearsal hall of a dance academy, eyes wide with admiration as he watched dancers perform on stage. He hadn't even been dancing. But it didn't matter. He had been seen. Malcolm barely had time to react before his father grabbed him by the arm and dragged him out of the room. Dad, stop. He twisted, trying to break free, but Daniel's grip was iron. They stormed through the dark hallway, down the grand staircase, past the cold, lifeless paintings of ancestors Malcolm had never cared about. Then, the office door slammed shut behind them. Malcolm's chest heaved as he stumbled forward. His father stood tall behind the mahogany desk, staring down at him like he was some kind of disappointment he couldn't fix. Then, finally, his voice came. Low. Dangerous. After everything I built for you. He leaned forward, hands gripping the desk. This is how you repay me. Malcolm's breath hitched. His hands curled into fists. I didn't do anything wrong. His voice was shaking, but he forced himself to hold his father's gaze. Daniel's jaw tightened. Nothing wrong. Nothing wrong. His voice exploded through the room. You skipped a business seminar to watch. What? A show? You embarrassed yourself in front of the entire school. Do you think I built this empire so you could throw it away for a hobby? Malcolm's heart was pounding. It's not just a hobby. The words tumbled out before he could stop them. Daniel's expression darkened. What did you just say? Malcolm swallowed, his entire body trembling. But there was no turning back now. It's not a hobby. Dance is my passion. Silence. For a moment, only the sound of the grandfather clock ticking filled the space between them. Then Daniel spoke, low and sharp, like a blade cutting through flesh. You are a black boy in a white man's world. The words knocked the breath out of Malcolm's lungs. His father stepped forward, his towering frame casting a shadow over him. Do you understand what that means? It means you have to be twice as strong, twice as ruthless, twice as good as any of them just to earn a seat at the table. And you want to waste it all for dance? Dancing makes you weak. Malcolm felt something inside him snap. His lips trembled, his hands clenched so tight his nails dug into his palms. No, his voice was hoarse, shaking, but firm. Dancing makes me happy. His father laughed. A cruel, empty laugh that echoed in the cold room. Happiness? You think the world cares if you're happy? The world cares about power, about survival, about dominance. He shook his head in disgust. I won't let you throw your future away over this nonsense. Malcolm took a step forward. It's not nonsense. And it's my future, not yours. For the first time in his life, Malcolm stood his ground against his father. His father's nostrils flared. His fists clenched at his sides. Then he turned, walked toward the bookshelf, and pulled something out. Malcolm's dance shoes. Malcolm stilled. His breath caught. No, but before he could move, Daniel lifted them and tore them apart. The sound of ripping leather echoed through the office. Malcolm let out a choked gasp. His father threw the remains onto the floor. There. Now it's done. Malcolm felt everything crumble inside him. The one thing that was his, that made him feel alive, was gone. His vision blurred with rage, pain, helplessness. He fell to his knees, picking up the broken pieces with shaking hands. But Daniel wasn't done. His voice was cold. Final. You will never see Celeste again. And you will never step foot in a dance studio. Ever. Again. Malcolm's breath hitched. His father turned, picked up his phone, and made a single call. It's done. Enroll him at Blackwell Academy. Malcolm's eyes widened in horror. Blackwell. A strict elite boarding school known for producing future CEOs and politicians. It was in Connecticut. Hours away from Boston, away from Celeste, away from dance. No, the word came out in a whisper. Daniel ended the call. You leave next week. Malcolm felt sick. He stood up on shaking legs, heart hammering so loud he thought he would pass out. His father turned to leave, but Malcolm's voice cracked through the silence. I hate you. Daniel paused. For a split second, Malcolm thought he saw something flicker in his father's eyes. Something almost human. Then it was gone. And without another word, Daniel walked out of the office, leaving Malcolm alone, standing in the ruins of his dream. Tears burned his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. Instead, he bent down, gripping the torn remains of his shoes. His hands trembled. His body shook. And for the first time in his life, Malcolm realized. His father wasn't his greatest enemy. His father was his prison. And if he didn't find a way out, he would never be free. Malcolm had never known silence like this. The world outside Blackwell Academy felt distant, like a life he had been forced to leave behind. It had been 3 weeks since he had been sent away. 3 weeks since his father had torn his dream apart and left him to rot in a world of boardrooms and business lectures. But dance never left him. Every night, he still felt the rhythm in his bones, his muscles twitching with the phantom memory of movement. Even without music, even without a stage, he still danced in his mind. And someone noticed. One evening, after another suffocating day of forced studies, Malcolm received a letter, slipped beneath his dorm door. No name, no return address, just a single line, written in sharp, familiar handwriting. Midnight. The South Gate. Don't ask questions. Just come. Malcolm's breath caught. Celeste. Without hesitation, he shoved the note into his pocket and waited. At exactly midnight, Malcolm slipped out of his dorm, heart hammering so hard he was sure the entire building could hear it. The South Gate of Blackwell loomed ahead, tall, iron, unmovable. But just beyond it, a dark-colored car idled with its headlights off. Celeste leaned against the passenger door, arms crossed. Malcolm ran to her. For the first time in weeks, his chest loosened, his throat unclenched. Mijo, I thought you'd never come. Celeste's voice was soft but firm, the same as it had always been. The only real thing in his life. How did you find me? Malcolm asked, breathless. She gave a small, knowing smile. Your father thinks he controls everything. But he forgets that the people he ignores, we watch everything. She opened the door. Come, I want you to meet someone. Malcolm hesitated. Where are we going? Celeste's expression darkened slightly. To fight for your future. The warehouse was nothing like the gleaming halls of the elite academies his father had surrounded him with. It was raw, gritty, alive. The scent of sweat, determination, and something electric filled the air. At the center stood Miguel Vasquez, a tall, broad-shouldered man with scarred hands and fire in his eyes. So this is the kid, huh? Miguel's deep voice cut through the air as he studied Malcolm with an unreadable expression. Malcolm straightened, meeting his gaze. Miguel nodded. I hear you got a problem, Bennett. You dance, but the world tells you that you shouldn't. Malcolm swallowed hard, but he refused to look away. I just want a chance. Miguel let out a low chuckle. A chance? Kid, I don't hand out chances. You earn them. And right now, you're weak. Malcolm's jaw tightened. Then make me strong. Miguel's eyes flickered with something dangerous approval. All right then. You want to fight? Let's fight. Malcolm had trained before, but nothing like this. Miguel was ruthless, unforgiving. Every night, after sneaking out of Blackwell, Malcolm pushed himself harder than he ever had before. The warehouse floor became his battlefield. He trained until his feet bled, until his legs gave out beneath him, until he felt like he might never move again. Miguel was relentless. You think pain is going to stop you? You think exhaustion is going to stop you? The world is already against you, Bennett. You gonna let it win? Malcolm gritted his teeth. No. Miguel narrowed his eyes. Then prove it. And Malcolm did. He trained through the ache, through the fatigue, through the echoes of his father's voice telling him he would never belong. And slowly, something inside him changed. One night, after an especially brutal session, Miguel tossed Malcolm a flyer. Malcolm caught it, brow furrowing as he scanned the bold text, Boston Elite Dance Championship, Grand Prize, a full scholarship to any academy of your choice. Malcolm's heart pounded. He knew this competition. It was the biggest in the city. An event that would be crawling with elite scouts, investors, and some of the most powerful names in the dance world. And then Malcolm saw a name that made his blood turn to fire. Liam Kingsley, competitor. Malcolm's hands tightened around the flyer. This was it. His chance. To prove to his father. To prove to himself. To prove to the world that he was meant for this. He took a deep breath and looked Miguel dead in the eye. Sign me up. Miguel smirked. Thought you'd say that. Malcolm had never felt this alive. Every night, he trained harder, faster, stronger. Miguel drilled him until his body screamed, until he collapsed on the floor gasping for breath, until the only thing keeping him standing was his will. But one night, something happened. Mid-turn, Malcolm's ankle twisted. Hard. He hit the floor with a sharp, painful cry. Miguel was beside him in seconds. Malcolm clenched his jaw, breathing through the pain. No, he couldn't be injured now. Not now. Miguel crouched down, his expression unreadable. Listen to me, kid. This is the moment where you decide. Are you going to let this stop you? Or are you going to fight through it? Malcolm's fingers dug into the floor. Pain burned through his ankle, but he refused to fall now. His father's words echoed in his head. You will never belong. He pushed himself up, looked Miguel in the eyes, and said, I'm not stopping. Miguel's lips curled into a slow, approving grin. Then let's get you ready. On the night before the competition, Malcolm stood before the studio mirror, staring at his own reflection. His body ached. His feet were blistered. But his eyes burned with something unstoppable. This was it. Tomorrow, he would step onto that stage. And win or lose, he would finally prove that he belonged. The lights of the Boston Elite Dance Championship were blinding, the stage stretching before Malcolm like a battlefield. The air was thick with tension, whispers rippling through the audience like waves. This was it. The moment that would decide everything. Malcolm stood behind the velvet curtain, his hands trembling, heart hammering against his ribs. He forced himself to breathe, to focus, to drown out the gnawing doubt creeping in. From the front row, his father, Daniel Bennett, sat stiffly in his seat, arms crossed, expression unreadable, but his eyes burned with disapproval. Malcolm could almost hear his voice in his head. This is what happens when you chase foolish dreams. His stomach twisted, but then he caught sight of Celeste and Miguel, standing off to the side, giving him a firm nod. His people, his real family. And then Liam Kingsley stepped onto the stage. The crowd roared in approval. Liam turned slightly, locking eyes with Malcolm from across the stage entrance. He smirked, adjusting his pristine costume, then turned away. Malcolm knew what that look meant. You don't belong here. The music started, and Liam moved like a well-rehearsed machine, precise, sharp, elegant. He knew the judges favored him, knew he came from a prestigious lineage of elite dancers. He was the champion. The audience ate it up. And Malcolm? Malcolm had to be better. Backstage, Malcolm prepared himself, rolling his shoulders, breathing deeply. He could do this. His name was announced. He stepped onto the stage, but something felt off. The second his foot touched the polished floor, he knew. His heart stopped. There was something slick beneath his shoe. Water. Barely noticeable, but enough to be deadly for a dancer. A deliberate act of sabotage. His eyes scanned the crowd, searching for Liam's smirk, his father's disapproval, the judge's indifference. His pulse thundered. This was it. His music began. He had no choice but to dance. Malcolm moved with everything inside him. Every step, every motion, he poured his soul into it. His movements were fluid, raw, electrifying. This was not just a performance. This was his rebellion, his war, his heart laid bare for the world to see. And then his foot slipped. Time froze. His body pitched forward. The stage tilted beneath him. The audience gasped. Malcolm's arms flailed for balance, his ankle twisting at an impossible angle. He hit the floor. Pain exploded through his side. Daniel smirked from the audience. Whispers filled the room. This is what happens when you chase foolish dreams. Malcolm's vision blurred. And for a split second, he saw it, the exit doors at the back of the theater. He could walk away right now. Disappearing would be easier. Liam would win. The world would move on. His father would be right. But then he saw Celeste. She was standing now, her hands clenched into fists. She wasn't looking at him in pity. She was waiting to see what he would do. And suddenly, Malcolm knew. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning. Malcolm forced himself up. He felt the sting of bruises, the burn in his ankle, but he refused to stop. He pivoted, twisted the fall into a roll, using the momentum to launch himself into a powerful spin. The mistake became a movement. The failure became art. And suddenly, it wasn't a fall anymore. It was part of the dance. The crowd fell silent. Then applause. First, a few hesitant claps. Then a roar of approval. The entire theater erupted. Liam's smirk vanished. Daniel's expression shock. Disbelief. Something else. Malcolm finished his performance stronger than he had ever danced before. He bowed. And for the first time, he felt truly free. Backstage, Malcolm's heart raced as the judges prepared to announce the winners. He already knew. Liam would win. The system was built for people like him. And sure enough, first place. Liam Kingsley. The audience cheered. Liam stood proudly, flashing a victorious grin at Malcolm. But then, the head judge raised a hand. And tonight, we have a special award. A pause. The Artistic Integrity and Resilience Award, granted to a dancer who demonstrated not only skill but the true spirit of perseverance, goes to Malcolm Bennett. Silence. Then, thunderous applause. Malcolm froze. The judges stood, clapping. The crowd chanted his name. And then, Malcolm turned to the front row. His father was still. For the first time, Daniel Bennett had no words. And Malcolm? He didn't need them anymore. As Malcolm left the stage, Celeste pulled him into a fierce hug. Miguel clapped him on the back, grinning. You didn't just dance, kid. You fought. Malcolm nodded, chest rising and falling with pure, unfiltered victory. He didn't win first place. But he won something bigger. His freedom. And as he walked past his father, who sat frozen in his chair, eyes locked onto the son he had never truly seen before. Malcolm didn't stop. He didn't need his father's permission, because now he belonged to himself. And this was just the beginning. The room was still humming with excitement, the energy of the competition lingering in the air. Malcolm stood at the center of it all, the weight of his artistic integrity and resilience award resting in his hands. It wasn't the first-place trophy. It wasn't what the elite had deemed the highest honor. But to him, it meant everything. Applause still echoed through the theater as Malcolm turned toward the audience, scanning the sea of faces. His eyes landed on the one person he hadn't dared to look at until now, Daniel Bennett. His father sat in the front row, unmoving. His face, always so controlled, always so unreadable, was now something else. Something Malcolm had never seen before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't disappointment. It was something closer to awe. For the first time in his life, Daniel Bennett wasn't looking at his son like a failure. He was looking at him like a fighter, a warrior. But Malcolm didn't need his father's approval anymore. Not today. Not ever again. So when he walked past Daniel, he didn't stop, didn't hesitate, didn't shrink himself down to fit the mold his father had built for him. But just before he stepped away, he paused, turned back, met his father's eyes one last time, and with steady, unshaken confidence, he said, "This is who I am, and I'm just getting started." Then he walked away, and for the first time, he felt completely, undeniably free. Malcolm's journey was never just about dance. It was about freedom. The freedom to choose his own path, to defy the expectations placed upon him, and to rise above the people who tried to control him. His father, Daniel, believed that power meant submission, that to survive in a world designed against him, Malcolm had to become twice as ruthless, twice as cold, twice as detached. But Malcolm proved something greater. True strength isn't about control. It's about having the courage to be yourself, even when the world tells you not to. How many of us have been told that our dreams are impossible, that we don't belong, that we should fit into someone else's expectations instead of following our hearts? Malcolm's story is the story of every person who has ever been doubted, underestimated, or told they weren't good enough. And yet, he stood his ground. Even after humiliation, betrayal, and sabotage, he rose to his feet, not because he was given permission to, but because he chose to. And that's the lesson we all need to remember. No one can define your worth except you. Society will place labels on you. Some people will try to dim your light, tell you that your passion is foolish, that you should take the safe road. But safe doesn't mean happy. Safe doesn't mean fulfilled. And at the end of your life, when you look back, you won't remember the expectations you met. You'll remember the moments you were brave enough to fight for what truly mattered. Malcolm didn't win first place, but he won something greater, respect. He forced people to see him, to acknowledge his talent, to recognize that he belonged. And that's something no one can take away from him. He didn't need validation from the judges, from Liam Kingsley, or even from his father. He only needed to believe in himself. Now, ask yourself, how many times have you held yourself back because of fear? How many dreams have you buried because someone told you they weren't worth chasing? If Malcolm had listened to his father, he would have spent his whole life wondering what if. But instead, he made the choice to fight. What choice will you make? This isn't just a story. It's a call to action. If you've ever felt like Malcolm, like the world doesn't want to see you shine, know that your voice, your talent, and your dreams matter. The only way to prove the doubters wrong is to show up, stand tall, and never give up. So if you believe in Malcolm's journey, if you've ever faced a moment where you had to stand up for yourself, show your support. Like this video, comment below, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next powerful story. Every like, every comment, every share helps spread these messages of resilience, hope, and strength. Because just like Malcolm, we are just getting started.